Hey there, I'm Jackie Ferris. Preserving history can be a tricky business, especially when you're talking about historic artifacts. This week on the 302, we are at Rockwood Park and Museum checking out a new exhibit called Brittle Beauty that gives us a behind-the-scenes look at exactly what it takes to keep items on display in their best condition. Get ready, the 302 is taking you on a tour. From paintings to plants, there's a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes to get ready for visitors. Right now, we're at Rockwood Museum and Gardens. We're talking about a new exhibit that they have that talks all about conservation. It's called Brittle Beauty. I'm joined by Ryan Grover, who's going to tell us a little bit about what's going on here at Rockwood. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for coming back.
Now, we're going to be all over the place with this thing, but we're going to start in the garden. Tell me about this garden here.
So the garden that's behind us is called our walled garden. The wall and the barn behind it were really established in the 1850s. They're like 170 years old. So you're looking at this really ancient location. And originally this space used to be a home for the house garden, like the vegetable garden for Rockwood Mansion. This is where they would have produced most of the food that they were eating. We also had greenhouses here. All of that's gone. Back in the 1920s, 1930s, the family raised all of that landscape architecture, and they created the garden space that's behind us. So this garden now is about 100 years old, and we call it the Colonial Revival Garden. It's a very sort of continental European parterre garden, which just means that it's a garden that's set up on a grid system. Really different for Rockwood and something that we really felt that we needed to be able to preserve.
So instead of vegetables, we have a lot of really beautiful plants. Talk to me a little bit about, you know, when you're preserving it, just the shift and trying to keep it, I guess, indicative to the time.
Well, one of the big things that's really sort of at the forefront is we want to know how the garden is working. We need to look at the paths, we need to look at drainage systems, we need to look at how the fountain is working, because all of those things are now like 170 years old. The plantings, some of these plants, especially some of the larger sort of rose bushes that we have here, have been growing in the same position for 100 years. Some of them have perished. So we need to look at how some of these heritage plant selections are also performing and whether or not we need to replace them. And ultimately, we just want to be able to bring back the actual sense of geometry, the feeling of what the Bringhursts have brought to this house or to this garden space. So for instance, all of the bushes that you see sort of lining the park space, a lot of them have perished over time. So we need to replace them with similar kinds of bushes that will work even better in this particular environment so that we can sort of preserve this for the next several generations to come.
Now, when you're doing this work, I mean, I'm always amazed at how much material you have to get information from. Now, do you take this from diaries, or was there a gardener that had records, or?
Yes, all of the above. This is one of the things that makes Rockwood such an exceptional space to work in, is that there is, number one, huge amounts of photographic documentation. There's I think over 7,000 photographs associated with Rockwood from 1860 to 1965. And all of those are online through the University of Delaware Special Collections. So it's a great resource. Plus, we have documentation about the kinds of plants that were originally planted here, starting in the 1850s moving forward, so we know exactly which trees were planted, where they went to. We can do a lot with the landscape here to preserve it in the same state as several different members of the family from 1850 up until the time that it became a Newcastle County property.
Now, you mentioned pictures. Now, if I'm not mistaken, are there pictures of the Bringhursts or people that work for the Bringhursts actually working in this space?
The Bringhursts documented everything. So we have great documentation about the servants of Rockwood, the people that worked in the farming capacity, because this used to be a 400-acre farm. But we also have images of the house, images of the barns behind us, all the different kinds of structures that were lost a long time ago, like an old chicken coop, which I particularly love and would love to bring back. So these are just sort of, they're terrific documents that we'll be able to sort of use as resources forever, really.
Now, you said some of these plants have been here for a very long time.
Especially the roses.
Some have perished. How do you keep something going generation after generation if you have you know, say a rose bush or a tree or whatever? I mean, it's got to be a big task.
And we have individuals here at Rockwood that deal specifically with this heritage garden space and deal with these older varieties of plants. Yeah, absolutely. And so it takes a lot of concentration. It takes a lot of care. We have to look at sort of the health of that plant and see how it's doing. Sometimes we have to do preventive work to be able to keep it healthy over a long period of time. And like I said, sometimes in terms of landscape management, you just have to replace things that are failing.
Mm-hmm. So I can imagine, you know, 100 years ago, this would have been a great space just to come and sit and contemplate, just because you've got kind of like you're hidden, surrounded by trees.
Absolutely. And as a result, it becomes one of the favorite spaces for a lot of the bridal events that we have here. So we do a lot of weddings in this space because it is so enclosed. It is such a great space for parties, and it's just remarkably beautiful. But it can be a lot better, and it can be a lot more historically accurate.
So the two structures that we have here, you talked briefly about the barn itself, which is where the weddings happen, right? And then this, I guess, is this building here houses all of the stuff to do the gardening? Or?
A lot of it, yeah. So originally the two buildings that are sort of here attached to the wall, one is a garden shed and one was a boiler room. The two greenhouses that used to be in this space used to have heated floor systems, and the boilers would boil water, obviously, that would send it through this sort of, through the floor structure to be able to heat the interiors. And then they were planting, or they were growing inside those greenhouses all sorts of exotic materials. Joseph Shipley, the founder of the house and the guy who built those greenhouses, he was a horticulturalist, and he was especially well known for his grapes. So one of the greenhouses was set aside specifically for his grapes.
Did he ever make wine with those grapes?
He did. He did.
Oh, but you'd like to bring that back too.
Yes, I would.
Absolutely. So we've talked about the garden, but now I guess we're going to move inside. Is
Absolutely.
that right? And we'll do that when we return.
I'm Tony Boyd-Heron from the Peninsula Gallery, and seeing all the art that you do on 302 just blows my mind.
Welcome back. We are at Rockwood, and we have moved into the archives. Ryan, this is an amazing space. Talk to me about just this building. It's got to be, what, climate controlled and...
We are so fortunate to have this. Somebody was really thinking about the longevity of this collection when they decided that this was a priority and they needed to construct this this facility. And this facility it's off-site from the museum. It's not actually inside the museum, but it is within the park, which is really terrific. So it has really great proximity to the museum gallery spaces.
So this is where items that need to be conserved, and when we say conserved, we mean cleaned or repaired or restored in some way.
Right.
Those items come here and wait their turn. Is that right?
Absolutely. And it's also sort of a long-term storage space for those objects that aren't on public view. So the majority of actually our collection right now is in the archives room. So it's just put together on shelves, and it's hanging from racks, and it's got this great compact shelving in this climate-controlled environment so that we will be able to protect these things long-term. But at the same time, there's a lot here that definitely needs to be conserved.
So when you first walk in, one of the showstoppers or the attention grabbers are those beautiful mirrors. Just, I mean, talk to me a little bit about those.
So originally, the house, the mansion, was outfitted sometime in the late 1800s with these over-mantel mirrors. They're enormous. They're taller than I am, and I'm pretty tall. We're pretty tall. And they are gilded, and they're really, really ornate. They're fantastic. They're a conservation nightmare, but they're terrific. They're really lovely. A number of them have been put back into the house, but we still have probably 5 or 6 of them that would need some attention, and then we'll be able to reinstall them in different spaces in the museum.
So when you have to get something restored, you're in the perfect area to do it. So
we are, absolutely. One of America's best, one of the only, but one of the best schools for conservation, art conservation, is just up the road from us. So we have terrific access to their graduates and other individuals that have come here. But the Mid-Atlantic region has been historically a great place for collectors and for museums. So we have this huge crowd, this huge community of really talented folks that we can call on to come help us.
Now, I see the table with all of these items that are laid out. Now, you're cataloging things in your collection. Do you know everything that's in the collection, or are you still discovering?
We are absolutely still discovering. One of the things that's sort of interesting about our institution is that it was established with between a partnership. One of the partners was Newcastle County, which owned the house and the property, but then there was a friends group, the Friends of Rockwood, that was established in order to be able to start collecting the objects. And those were two separate entities for a long time existing in the same space. In 2014, not too long ago, the Friends of Rockwood dissolved, and they basically gifted that entire collection, transferred it to Newcastle County. So Newcastle County has only actually been responsible for this collection for less than 10 years. So we are playing catch up now, trying to record things, trying to get a really good idea of what's in this collection, even just getting a count of things or where they, or just keeping track of where they are on different shelves. And so as we are assessing the condition of objects, we're also recording the information that we have about those objects and putting them into a larger database.
And when you talk about some of those objects, I mean, it's just so vast. You can't really look around here.
It's thousands
of items. Now, you have a lot of lighting here.
We do.
From pre-electric and electric, right?
Right. So the house, the mansion itself was established with a gas lighting. So that was sort of architectural elements that were fed by a gas house that was off-site and send that gas up. And it would basically just be open flames inside the house, terrifying as that may sound. But they also had candle lighting back then. And then sometime around 1892, 1894, they started to electrify the house. And so you have these layers of technology, pre-industrial and post-industrial sort of lighting technologies happening during the heyday of this house. And we have almost all of those fixtures still boxed up in crates and put on shelves. I would love, love, love to be able to bring those back, but that's going to be a big effort.
I can imagine. I can imagine. And you also have an entire collection of, I don't know, hundreds of books. You walk down this one aisle, and there's, you know, my favorite, the Love Pirate. Then there's volumes of Shakespeare. There's world atlases, and there's a lot of green books in there. Do you know if you have any poison books?
Well, so we know the individuals that have conducted that study. They're very interested in finding out and doing survey work here to find out whether or not we have books that should be isolated, but we've not gotten that far into the collection to know yet. But that book collection is enormous, yeah. And it's been, you know, it was collected for, God, 120 years. And so the family members that were here just kept adding to the library.
Really
and
vast.
The library collection is just sort of a microcosm of all that's collected here. So we have a huge textile collection from the family members. We have a huge furniture collection. They redecorated all the time, and when they got tired of things, they just put it out in the barn. Well, we went into the barn, and we're starting to save those things and bring them back and to restore them and make sure that they are here for as long as we can possibly keep them alive.
And again, relying on the diaries and the records and things like that to try to give them some context.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, each object has a story, and the stories often report back to the time frame when the things were entered the house. You know, these were folks that were buying things that were new in the 1850s, but they were also buying things that were antiques in the 1850s. So we have this sort of range of storylines that we can tell, but we also have a range of conditions for those objects as well. And, you know, unfortunately, there's a lot that needs to be worked on here. The thing that I always have to tell people is that this is stuff that was owned by families and used by families with kids and everybody else. And when the things got broken, sometimes they got fixed, but then sometimes they just put it in the attic or put it in the barn and replaced it with something new. They never got rid of anything.
But that's good, though, because now you have all these objects that you can restore and you can share with the community. And we're going to move inside and take a look at the exhibit when we return.
My name is Dale Clifton from the Discover Sea Shipwreck Museum. We have lots of history here, but there's always something new on the 302.
So now we've moved into the mansion to take a look at some of the objects that are on display that need conservation. Again, Ryan is giving us the grand tour. So Ryan, let's talk a little bit about, you know, the objects that you have in this room. All of them need a little bit of TLC, right?
It's true. Yeah, this exhibition's a little risky from a museum standpoint. Usually museums like to show off their best things or the objects that are in great condition. They don't want to really allow their visitors to get distracted with the condition of objects. They just want them to enjoy the objects. But this show is all about sort of bringing your attention to the need that is here at Rockwood, all of the things that really need attention and need a lot of work.
The neediest thing in this room is that painting. Tell me, what is going on with that painting?
You know, I think that this is probably one of the paintings that were rescued from the barn, literally, sometime in the end of the 1900s, just before there was a huge renovation here at the museum. And it's full of holes. I think it's probably 18th century. I think it might be British, possibly Italian. And it's in deplorable condition, but it's such a cool thing. And there's only going to be a limited number of paintings that were ever associated with Rockwood. So whether they're in terrific condition or they're in terrible condition, we still have to treat them the same, and hopefully, if we can, restore them so that they can be shared.
Absolutely, because you wouldn't want them to fall into such disrepair that there's just no turnaround for them.
It's kind of my job to keep them around for as long as I can.
Absolutely. Well, talk to me a little bit about this this table here. It's one of a pair, right?
It is, yeah. Remarkable 18th century British. So this is at the core, this is a wooden table that then is covered in layers of hard gesso, like a plaster. The plaster is then carved, and then eventually they put a gilded, sort of a gold leaf cover over top of the entire thing. And originally they were beautiful, really, really stylish, incredible set of tables. They're still really beautiful. That's why it's in the show, Brittle Beauty, except that over time, the gilded surfaces wears away. The surfaces get clean, they get dusted, the gold gets rubbed away. And at some point, to save money, individuals used gold paint in the first part of the 20th century to try and restore some of this back to its sort of golden luster. But now, in order to be able to preserve these things, we're going to have to not only remove that gold paint, restore some of that plasterwork, and then re-gild the entire surface again. So these will be, when we are able to finally conserve these objects, it's going to be very comprehensive, but completely worth it. They're just terrific.
Absolutely. Such detail involved, and you can tell that it's been through a lot. And you have a list of 10 agents of deterioration. The top two, I guess, would be, or the top 3 or 4? What's the hardest?
The ones that we have to be sort of most mindful of here in a museum setting are sort of mishandling, sort of picking up objects that shouldn't be picked up, or moving them to places that they shouldn't be moved to, or sort of putting them in sort of storage facilities that aren't right for them. But the handling, the actual sort of like tactile sort of movement of objects is one of the scariest things here, because sometimes people that maybe don't have that kind of training try to take it upon themselves to move something as elaborate as this eagle table, and catastrophic things can happen, have happened in the past. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the big things. But just the obvious stuff like moisture, temperature, humidity, light damage. That's a huge thing for museums. We always have to battle light and other forms of environmental conditions. So, but then even sort of strange things like making sure that records are always associated with an object so that you always know its historical context. That's also conservation. Really,
really important. Now, one thing that did stand the test of time would be the medicines and the see if I can say this right, apothecary kit.
Yeah. So some of our family members here, the Bringhursts, had an apothecary store at a pharmacy, an early pharmacy from the late 1700s down on Market Street in downtown Wilmington. So we've inherited pieces of their business over the years. And one of the things that recently came in was this terrific little chest. It's awesome. It's terrific, but it's filled with tinctures and medicines from the late 1800s. I have absolutely no idea what I'm supposed to do with these things, but eventually we're going to have to dispose of those materials because they could be corrosive to the objects that are containing in the glass vials in the wooden case. And I can collect cases and vials and things of that nature, but when it comes to 19th century chemicals, I'm going to probably draw the line there.
Yeah, I would imagine so, and you have to be mindful of when something you can't restore it, or you do have to dispose of it, the proper way to dispose of it. So there's like another layer of research there.
Right. There's a governing body for a lot of institutions, a lot of museums in America called the American Alliance of Museums, and they put out terrific guidelines about what do you do with an object that just can't be restored. What do you do to ethically dispose of that thing, even when it's at a point where you can no longer share it with the public. And so we follow those rules as much as we possibly, well, at all times, really, yes. And to make sure that we're doing things according to sort of best community standards.
So an exhibit like this has got to go a long way to not only educate the public about the need for restoration, but also the need for resources to take care of this, you know, to hire people, to get the services, things like that. Yeah, the donation box was actually the first thing I hung in this exhibition. So, I mean, do you have a list of things that you want to send out? I mean, can you tell us a little bit about, you know, what is on your to-do list? In the year that I've been here at Rockwood, we have been working with students from Winter's conservation program as well as the University of Delaware's undergraduate conservation program to be able to create priority lists of objects, whether it be paintings or furniture, ceramic objects, silver things, manuscript materials, books. I mean, there's a whole list of things that are really necessary in terms of our interpretation, but also are in such a state of condition that they really need to be worked on as quickly as possible. So we're creating priority lists based upon different community needs. Now, a good number of the folks in our audience are really into history, and so if somebody out there wants to help you restore something, maybe make a donation, how do they do that? Call me. Is there a number or a website that they can check out? The best thing to do is go through rockwood.org. All of our contact information is there. Excellent. Ryan, thank you so much for taking this time to share this with us. I appreciate the attention. Thank you. We'll be right back. For more information on any of the exhibits here at Rockwood, you can visit rockwood.org. That'll do it for this week's episode of The 302. We're going to leave you now with some beauty shots of the gardens. Until next time, I'm Jackie Ferris. Tell them you saw it on The 302.